Greetings to all. I'm Tom Palmer with Atlas Network, and welcome to Freedom Worldwide. Today, we'll discuss an issue of great importance to all of us, which is attaining legal equality for all and the many benefits that flow from equal enjoyment of liberty. Our focus today is especially on the legal inequalities that harm women, but we'll also see how such inequalities harm their families, their communities, everyone, regardless of gender or generation. Our discussants today are Rose Marie Fike, an economist at Texas Christian University, a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute, and author of many studies on the economic impact of gender inequalities. Arpita Nepal is joining us from Nepal. She's an economist and co-founder and director of the Nepal-based Samriddhi Foundation for Prosperity. And Maureen Castle-Tusty, a filmmaker who has directed many important documentaries, including The Singing Revolution, which showed the role of nonviolent acts of singing in bringing down Soviet tyranny, and whose latest documentary, She Rises Up, is currently showing in cinemas and film festivals around the world. So we have a lot to discuss here today. Let's start with Rose Marie. Rose Marie, you've written and studied the legal inequalities that deny basic rights to women. It's not free enterprise if half of the market participants aren't free. Could you explain how that works and some examples of these unfreedoms?
Sure. Well, as many of your viewers are probably familiar with the Economic Freedom of the World Index, it used to be the case that we kind of assumed that men and women have equal access to markets in the data. But the World Bank issues a report every year called Women, Business, and the Law, which measures restrictions that women have to face on their economic participation that men don't actually have to face. So what I've done is I've looked at that data and I've looked at issues related to economic rights specifically. So freedom of movement, freedom to work, can you enter into a contract, can you own property? And there are 115 countries in the world where at least some area of economic freedom is restricted for women as opposed to men. So the most pervasive restrictions would be labor market regulations, restricting the type of jobs that women can do. So there's about 33% of the world, a third of the world, has some form of labor regulation. Specifically, a really common one is women aren't allowed to work in the mining industry in 65 different countries. In places like Belarus, women can't work with pesticides, right? And so maybe my idea of a promising career isn't to work in pest control, but to some women across the world, that might represent their best opportunity to improve their life. So when there's a law in place that says, no, you cannot do this, that's taking away opportunities and choices for women. So some of the most pervasive, the regions with some of the most pervasive restrictions would be the Middle East, North African countries, the MENA countries, and some sub-Saharan African countries. Sudan, Yemen, the West Bank, Iran, these are countries that have limitations on women's ability to own and inherit property, ability to get a passport and choose where to live, which is really, freedom of movement is really important for economic freedom. There may not be an opportunity for me to improve my life where I'm at, so it's really important to choose to go elsewhere. So yeah, these are not just, a small part of the world with these types of restrictions. They can be very pervasive and even in places where you might not expect them, like Japan and Colombia and Argentina, they all have labor market restrictions that women are limited to doing some kind of work.
Now, you've also done work on the magnitude of the harms, not merely to the women participants who are most immediately affected, but the loss in productive capacity for the whole society as well. So everyone bears the burden of this. One thing I'd like to raise as a topic for discussion, and I'll turn to you, Arpita, is in much of the world, there might be a formal code that says men and women have equal rights, but customary law, which is really what governs behavior, doesn't recognize that, certainly with regard to property and inheritance and other very important parts of the legal system. Arpita, have you worked directly on reforms in Nepal and other countries on the ground? How do advocates of equal liberty change the situation on the ground, the real law that governs people's lives, so that women are in fact equal in law and rights and not merely on paper?
You've exactly pinpointed the situation that we face in Nepal, Tom, because on paper, women have been given equal rights in terms of property, although it's a recent achievement, as in like in the last 2 decades. We also have a lot of like occupational resistance or occupational restrictions, except for in migrant women in certain countries, and that is something that the bureaucracy tried to introduce, but there was a lot of resistance from advocates, and so therefore that wasn't necessarily implemented. So how does this actually work on? So on paper, you can absolutely have equality. Where we face problems is in these unseen regulations. So the regulations, although are written, are not necessarily part of the law, the regulatory framework, or what are called these working procedural documents. Those procedural documents then add on the steps of bureaucracy that makes women's participation in any kind of entrepreneurial activities or any kind of getting equal rights a lot more onerous. So one of the classic examples of this is more in identity rather than in economic participation. For example, getting citizenship for my children through my citizenship from a woman's citizenship. It's a big issue right now in Nepal because there are a lot of single women who want to grant their kids citizenship through their own citizenship. They hold Nepali citizenship, but are not able to do so. Although by law we're allowed to do that. But there are all of these extra regulatory procedural things that make it highly burdensome. And so we're trying to clear that up. But there's another part of this story, which is that of what you call customary law, which essentially is gendered norms when you come from a traditional society. And especially that is one based on religious traditions. And so those are forefronts. I don't think by writing on a piece of paper you can change attitudes. So for tackling gendered norms, I think a lot of work has been done by activists, but also by local women who provide these stark examples of going against the norm. And I think those interventions are much more effective in changing people's minds when it comes from within their family, within their community, rather than somebody else coming out from the top bottom and saying, you know, you should grant equal rights because this provides so and so benefits. That is actually looked at with a lot of suspicion in general. So I think those examples we've seen has been working in Nepal. So for example, a lot of micro enterprises in Nepal actually run by women. This is also a product in recent years because Nepal went through a civil conflict. So women suddenly became the head of the households because the men, went to fight off war. And so suddenly this decision-making power was in the hands of women. So women proved during that time that they are capable of making these economic decisions, so on and so forth. Whereas if a government policy, sometimes we think reservations or providing quotas is the best way to go about it. Sometimes these policies can have perverse consequences. So one such example is, say, for example, in the past two budget cycles, our government, prior to two budget cycles, our government introduced this fiscal policy that says that there is a tax reduction if the business is registered in the name of a woman. So what this essentially created is, or there's a tax reduction if the land is registered, also the amount of taxes that you have to pay if the land is registered in the name of the woman. So the perverse thing that happens is now women are coerced, their titles are coerced in the their names are coerced as the title holders of the property. Men take loans by keeping that property as collateral, but who gets blacklisted? It is the title holder of the property if those loans are not repaid, right? And so there are a lot of like perverse consequences that we create when we give, like even with in terms of tax breaks. I'm not saying this is like there is no specific study that I can tell you this is exactly the magnitude of the problem. This perverseness has occurred, but we have a lot of anecdotal evidence that this perverseness keeps coming out of women who are in trouble. Then they contact us and saying, look, all these legal documents I was asked to sign by my husband, by my father, by my brother. I trusted them. And what are we going to do? Like, I'm in this legal situation now because suddenly the bank is calling me and asking for all these loans. I have no idea where that money is. So, we get a lot of response like that. So I think the best examples that we've seen, as you've said, it's not just a piece of paper, but let's switch on to how can we change gendered norms. And that has got a lot to do with how do you bring about a gradual change in a very traditional society.
In working in a number of countries, I've worked with Atlas Network partners who work on helping women to achieve their property rights. And in some countries, although the law says they're equal, if a married couple is living together with their children, the husband dies, the brother-in-law will come and kick the wife and the child out of the house and take it from them. And it doesn't matter what a piece of paper says. They say, this is the way we're going to do it. And our partners work so hard to help educate women about their rights and to get other people in the community, women and men, to stand up and say, this is wrong. This is their home. Her husband passed away. She gets to live in it with her children and enjoy the benefits of it. These stories are told on the ground. They're often very personal. And we have Maureen Castle-Tusty here with us, that you tell some of these stories so powerfully, and your movie, She Rises Up, is just awesome. Why don't we actually start, Maureen, with a clip from the movie?
That'd be great. Thanks, Tom.
Wouldn't you be haunted if, like me, from the moment you were a little girl, you hear these stories of young people, my people, dying out there on the ocean? They're leaving because they have no jobs.
To say, let a woman save a portion of her salary that cannot be touched. 2 women came back the next day, beaten up.
The easiest way out will be for us to say that's enough, and then what will happen to the people.
Ahí mi pueblo en Santa Rosa, andaban los terroristas en la calle. Dije, tengo que hacer algo. Así me duele.
I was interested in helping as many women who looked like me, producing something and bringing it to the rest of the world.
Me puse a pensar, no, nunca hay empresarios. ¿Por qué no ser empresaria?
I see the potential of this to really uplift our communities.
When a woman is making money, she doesn't have to put up with situations that are not right. That's the power of a job.
Uno puede romper las cadenas, así sea de fierro, se puede romper. Eso es lo que pasó en mi vida.
We have to, as women, have the right to decide how we want our futures to be. We have to have the choice.
வீட்டுகளே சார் பெரியம்மா அம்மா அந்த மாதிரிலாம் சொல்லுவாங்க பாய்ஸ்க்கு சேமா நம்ம எப்பயுமே இருக்கணும் நம்மளும் வேலை செய்யணும் அப்படி.
We just intend to be the catalyst to what's possible. And then the magic happens.
Beautiful, Maureen. Tell us some of the stories that you've documented in your work.
Sure. So for this particular story, we really wanted to focus on the intersection of entrepreneurship, women gaining economic rights and gaining access to work, and the impact on poverty that intersection could have long term. So as a filmmaker, I see my role is to give a human face to this important research and data. And in this case, to really amplify the voices of women who are struggling to run their businesses, sharing in their own words the barriers they experience and what they see as the solutions. So for this film, we turned to people like Rosemary and her research that she's done with Women in Progress Report. We turned to many Atlas Network partners in Nepal, Latin America, Ukraine, Africa, meeting with those who are on the ground doing the work. And we find that's our best way to really learn what the barriers are. And then from there, we reach out further into the local community. And that's how we found these three particular women that we follow in the film. And they really stood out to us because they're creating jobs in their communities, and in particular, jobs for women who don't otherwise have that access. So through following them over time, I think people really get the opportunity to absorb and understand what these barriers really look and feel like. So I'll just start with one example. Gladys, that you saw in the trailer, from Peru. I do really love and admire Gladys because she is so unassuming, and yet she's had such remarkable life experiences. And really, though, she is just getting started. Gladys came from the most extreme poverty in the Andean Mountains. She built up a small mini market business, and today she's expanding it. She's now going through the more arduous process of truly becoming a formal company. And we did meet with a Atlas Network partner there who's actually working to improve that process of becoming formal, the Asociación de Contribuyentes del Perú. Please forgive my Spanish pronunciation. But they have done some tremendous work in improving that process. But here's the really exciting thing. In a period of reform some years back, Peru did eliminate the requirement that women needed a man to co-sign a loan with them. So you don't have that anymore. Fast forward to Gladys. She wants to expand and start a chain of mini markets today. Her husband, who's a really good guy, but he's very cautious, he's very nervous, and Gladys is the business owner, and she's clearly the one with the business mind. Gladys was able to get a loan on her own. She has built the second store, hiring more people, and now she's working on the third store, and she's almost paid off the loan and will be hiring more people. So when you meet the women who are living this, it really brings home the importance of all of this research and the reform. And that says to me that even one single reform can have real impact on people's lives.
These are just awesome stories. Tell us very quickly how people can find out more about it and where this is showing, I understand, all over the world.
It is. Right now, we're in theaters in the US the past few months. You can go to sherisesupfilm.com. Make sure you get the film part in there. And that has a lot of information, both about the subject, these topics, ways people could get a little more involved and further reading. But it also tells you how you can bring it to your local community. And the theatricals, a few more cities, but then we really go to universities and community groups, and we have people around the world requesting screenings. So we want to support sharing this film any way we can. And people can just reach out to us through the website, She Rises Up Film.
Well, I'd like to point out that our partners in Atlas Network all around the world are working every day on opening the market economy, on more inclusion, allowing everyone to participate in the benefits of the market so people are not excluded or marginalized by unjust, wicked, and poverty-creating laws. This is very important to our work. It's our core. We'd like to invite everyone on this webinar to join us on September 25 as Freedom Worldwide will host Atlas Network's Smart Bets virtual pitch competition. 10 Atlas Network partners will compete on this program for grant funding for their pro-freedom missions and projects. Each of the members of our 2025 cohort of Smart Bets will make their pitch online for why they should be one of the 3 organizations to compete on stage at Liberty Forum and Freedom Dinner in New York for a $50,000 grand prize investment in their project. So we'd love for you to be able to meet these partners. They're awesome, interesting, inspiring people, learn about their missions, and be a part of the action on September 25. So mark your calendars now and keep an eye on your inbox for incoming details. Now, Rosemarie, you studied the impact of these inequalities on economic freedom generally. How much prosperity, and what by that I don't mean numbers on charts, I mean access to nutrition, increased lifespan, better medical care, how much of that is lost because women are so often excluded from contributing to that prosperity?
So it depends, magnitude depends obviously on how pervasive the restrictions are. In some countries where the restrictions are maybe more informal or not very severe, we might be giving up somewhere between like 10 and 15% of GDP by restricting women's participation in the economy informally. When we have very severe, pervasive restrictions on property rights and freedom to contract and ability to open bank accounts, then what we are giving up increases to close to 25 to 30% of GDP, which is not small. That is not a small, and it makes sense, right? If I don't have the ability to participate in the market, I don't have the ability to offer my gifts to the world and offer my talents and my good ideas. So if you're restricting what women can do, you're hobbling your economy. You're tying chains around the ankles of your economy.
Well, and I mean, you mentioned 25 to 30%, but 10 to 15% is massive as well. If you could increase the wealth produced in a country by 10 to 15%, that's a staggering increase in well-being. And then if you do that year on and year on. So this affects everybody. This is not something unique to women. It's the whole society is harmed by these invidious unfreedoms or lack of respect. Arpita, as someone who's very much a practitioner on the ground, you've worked with people not only in Nepal, but around in other countries as well. What are some of the stories where you have seen the actual reform effort, where the ideas intersect with the policy to make life better?
Thank you, Tom, that I get to highlight some of my colleagues' work, not just from the region, but also around the world, especially work that I've been following for quite some time. So let me just start off with neighboring country, India, where two fantastic organizations are working in two different states fighting for these restrictions. So also an Atlas Network partner, CBPR India, is based in Kerala, and they're specifically fighting these restrictions placed in the hospitality industries, where women are not allowed to participate, say, for example, in alcohol licensing and like selling alcohol and so on and so forth, or working at nighttime. So they're working with the state level government to make regulatory changes. Similarly, there's a woman-founded institute called Trayas in India again, who are doing fabulous job. What they've done is they've published this study called the State of Discrimination Report, and they rank all the states in terms of like how much women face discrimination in certain rules and regulations, right, according to the discriminatory laws. And owing just before they produce the report, they have already taken the advocacy to the level that the federal government has changed up to 44 regulations where they've eased up women's participation in the labor force. But also they're actively working with the state of Punjab to make these regulatory changes at the state level, and they're open to advising and working with other state level governments as well. Slightly far off, let's move on to the continent of Africa, and Kafu Policy Institute, who I heard through Atlas because they won the 2022 Africa Liberty Award. And I find the work like brilliant because they're working on helping women out of poverty by educating them on their property rights, and like they're challenging the cultural biases, which is a work I highly relate to, because it is not just having property rights on paper, it is how do we challenge these cultural biases. And I think they're doing a fantastic work. They've managed to make women realize that you don't require your husband's approval because it's a customary practice rather than law to open up a bank account in married women cases and things like that. So they've achieved quite a lot. The Center for Development and Enterprise in Rwanda, who has just started owing to their research on looking at women entrepreneurs, specifically the ones who operate in the informal economy. And it's a fantastic study that has shown that right now in cross-border trade, because these women operate in the informal market owing to the regulation barriers and the tax barriers that they have to face, because they operate in the informal market, they're even more vulnerable to both sexual harassment, to physical harassment of other kinds. They have confiscation of their property. So they're facing like these massive challenges. And so what CDE is doing in Rwanda is it started the new project of working with the women in helping them convince to enter the formal economy, but they were also trying to work with the government in Rwanda to lower the entry barriers for these women entrepreneurs. Similarly, there's coming back to Asia, the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, who has done some fantastic work in terms of helping the government understand that allowing, if there are not enough economic opportunities in your country, women being able to migrate really provides a relief to their family in terms of all those metrics that we are talking about. The remittance that they send back is very important. So CHIPS in Indonesia has worked with the government in removing the ban, at least from the Middle East, on Indonesian migrant workers going to work in Indonesia. Similarly, they are trying to also encourage women entrepreneurs. They're trying to reduce regulatory barriers within the digital economy policy and having more women participate. So these are some very practical examples. I think the underlying theme overall is that there is no one-size-fits-all policy solution on a practical level. And it is best if local institutes come up with a solution because they best understand local realities. We've realized that because as Nepal goes federal, we also have provincial level think tanks who work on solutions that are much better fitted to the province that comes from them rather than us sitting at the federal level in Kathmandu. Of course, there are federal level, regulatory barriers that we can work on, but like the local level solutions, I think work best. And I think that recognition is slowly starting to filter through even in the development aid industry to a certain extent.
You mentioned the problems of sexual harassment, and this was made so vivid to me when I interviewed women entrepreneurs in Burundi, and the term that had been used was violence sexuelle when I was introduced. That did not begin to capture the horror. This was brutal, violent, and sometimes deadly organized sexual assault on women just for carrying goods to and from markets. Because of their informality and their vulnerability, sometimes even to government officials or police or border guards and so on, or when they would escape them from criminal gangs of predators who would assault them. So what the partners have done there is just really awesome to liberate them, to be able to freely go during the daytime when it's safer as formal participants in the market. And I have to say, it's such an honor for me to work with you and with other people in this network, people like Sam Reddy Foundation, CDI, and so on, who are working to create free enterprise and opportunity, liberty, and prosperity for everybody. We invest heavily in these projects for free enterprise, but as you noted, Arpita, they're all locally driven. We don't have a plan. We don't know the solutions in this country or that country. We rely on our partners to identify the problems and identify the solutions. And I'd like to invite viewers in this to become a part of that really remarkable effort by a donation to support our partners. $25 or more to Atlas Network will bring you into the network as a participant in this noble effort, and a subscription to Freedom's Champion, our magazine, which will be delivered to your door by a uniformed agent of a government agency. So I hope you'll donate. I hope you become a part of this global network of partner organizations working on behalf of liberty. I'd like to return back to you, Maureen, again, and on this movie, how awesome it is and how beautiful. Is it something that someone viewing this could say, could we organize a showing in our community or our university or in our city?
Absolutely. And I'm so struck because so much of what Arpita has mentioned, we heard such similar experiences, talking to many different groups in different countries, and you start to see the same barriers coming up again and again. And very interesting, the unintended consequences of you put this good policy in place, and then you see suddenly how it's being manipulated. And even in the film, Selena in Sri Lanka talks about that. With they did a program to empower women with their own bank accounts, and 2 women come back beaten up and have their equipment destroyed because they didn't give the full salary to the husband. So she's saying, even myself in my own country, I have to be mindful of this. So it's so important to hear from people in their own words, in their own country, what the issues are. And I think that's why I would love for any of the Atlas Network partners, any organizations or universities. The film comes very often. We can perhaps be there for a Q&A and foster a greater panel discussion around it. I think what the film does is show you women and what they're really up against, whether it's their business challenges or the social and cultural challenges that they're still up against. And then when you can have this kind of a discussion afterwards, it's just the perfect combination of you see these real people and the impact. And it is important for us to really show that change is possible. And for myself, it can feel overwhelming. You know, you talk to 24 different organizations, and you see the barriers, and you meet with the women, and you think, you know, how is a policy change going to affect them? But then suddenly you meet the women whose lives have been improved by one policy change. And it really does matter, and it really does add up. So that is what we try to share. And so I think the film is a good tool for that, to amplify the amazing work that Rosemary and Arpita and all of these kind of partners are doing on the ground in their own country. And then I just have to say one thing. Rosemary helped us. We were trying to craft how to encapsulate this. And the statistic that you helped us with, where 1/3 of countries, at first, when we were trying to calculate it, looking on your report, we came up with 1/5, even thinking, oh, that's huge. And then we worked with you and realized it is actually 1/3 of countries still have barriers, laws on the books that prevent women from working in some way or having their own financial independence. And that resonates with people. We are at Q&As talking about the film, especially in the US audience. It's very powerful for people to realize how much of this still exists in our world.
Rosemary, why don't you tell us a little bit about the project that you direct with the womenandprogress.org, because you've produced, as an economist, I don't want you to correct me, at zero price, they're not free, but the price is zero, a wealth of research that can be downloaded. What is available on that website, and how can people put that to work?
Sure. So the womenandprogress.org kind of compiles these reports that I do every other year on kind of the changes that have taken place in women's rights. So you can kind of see how things have shifted over time. Really positive news that since the 1970s, women have been gaining, we have an upward trajectory. Things are becoming more equal. But the reports also look at the correlation between economic freedom and a variety of development outcomes that you might care about. So, how does this translate to women's labor market outcomes or health outcomes and educational outcomes? And I have a recent report that's called Economic Freedom and Gender Norms, where it kind of thinks about, even though we're looking at these things from a codified formal rule type of sense, those can act as a barrier to underlying changes in gender norms. So if I want to be a trailblazer and enter into an occupation that women don't traditionally participate in, it's really helpful if there's not a law that says I'm not allowed to try that out, right? And so that most recent report, Economic Freedom and Gender Norms, shows that countries that are more economically free have gender norms and attitudes that are far more tolerant of women taking on job opportunities, higher education opportunities, and even political leadership opportunities.
Well, data is really powerful. I had the chance to read through the reports on it, and I learned a lot from it. So thank you very much for educating me and opening my eyes. The other thing that's so remarkable is so many inequalities of this sort that most people don't think about. Our friends in Kerala did such an amazing job when they learned women couldn't work after 8 o'clock at night in shops and so on. Well, it's very difficult. Even a woman who owned her own shop could not be working at it in the evening. She had to hire men to come in. This tremendously restricted the opportunity of women to be able to manage their own lives, to provide for their families and children, to make life better. And partners who organize those projects, do the research, discover these, and then do the additional level of research, going and talking to people. What is it really like? How do you actually experience the interactions with the government inspectors and the paperwork and so on? Document it and then take it to the public and policymakers. Arpita, you mentioned CDE in Rwanda. They discovered something that would not have occurred to most foreigners. To cross the border for cross-border trade in a landlocked country, you had to have a passport. Well, it gets stamped when you leave, stamped when you enter, stamped when you leave that country, and stamped again. 4 stamps for every journey. It fills up. You have to go get another passport. This is extremely expensive. And that meant people who couldn't afford this were going at night or at informal crossings and made very vulnerable. They transferred it by just getting a border crossing card. Just card, no stamp. You can do it during the daytime. That seemingly small thing transformed the lives of thousands, tens of thousands of women. They were able to experience the dignity of not being assaulted, to have their bodily autonomy respected. Their incomes went up 2 or 3 times because they don't have to pay all of these bribes. And big surprise, prices fell for consumers. Like win, 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 win all across the board. And it was a policy reform waiting to happen. And it took that kind of entrepreneurship to be able to bring that about. Maureen, do you have another great movie in the works at some point? I know it's so rude to say once you've done a masterpiece, what's the next one? But I, at least, am waiting to know what might be next in the pipeline.
You know, we're terrible business people because we should have our next project ready to go. But the fact is, we are going to be spending the next 9 months working on She Rises Up and sharing that film and supporting the outreach to really make sure people hear these stories, it gets into communities and really gets into international communities so they can see it as well. And I think also one of the things I do like in the film, and this is what one of our participants that we filmed, to see women that look like you, that are from your country, being successful and making their way and navigating this, even with all of these barriers, and seeing some of these entrepreneurs and what they're capable of doing in their own country is very important and empowering just in itself to see it. So really, that's our focus for the next year. Then we came across so many stories that we couldn't include in the film. So it's very hard to not think of like, oh, next one we could go back to Burundi and tell that amazing story of what's happened with the border crossing, something like that.
Well, it is deeply inspiring, and I'm very moved by this. I was almost in tears when I interviewed the women in Burundi, and they explained my naivete about what it meant to suffer sexual harassment, when they explained in direct terms the horror and the violence that was visited on them. And also because they had to have all kinds of government paperwork, which has now been mostly abolished. And if you didn't have all the papers to show that the eggs you were exporting were laid by Burundian hens, you could be in big trouble. And that often meant sexual extortion from state officials, as well as loss of your product and bribery, loss of income, and humiliation as the general framework for that. So I'm so moved by what our partners do. And if viewers in this program are similarly moved, a great way to take the next step is to meet our partners personally, including a number of those who are featured in She Rises Up and in our Freedom Worldwide series. Join us in New York on November 20 and 21 for the Liberty Forum and Freedom Dinner. It'll be held at the Sheraton Times Square. And this premier two-day gathering is your chance to get to know many of the world's free market leaders, entrepreneurs, champions of liberty, learn about the victories they've achieved for human dignity, and then celebrate those victories with them and with a global audience at the Freedom Dinner Gala. And you'll also be there when we announce the winner of the prestigious 2024 Templeton Freedom Award, which honors the organization that has accomplished the most innovative and impactful victory for individual rights, for economic empowerment, for limited government, for the free society. It's an opportunity you won't want to miss. And if you act soon, you'll even receive our early bird discount of 25% off the cost of your ticket. So go to atlasnetwork.org/events for more details. And I hope we'll be seeing you in New York, and you'll get to meet some of the really heroic and awesome people who have been promoting freedom for everyone. So come to New York and join us at the Atlas Network Liberty Forum and Freedom Dinner. Well, with that, we're coming close to being out of time. And I'd like to ask one quick note from Rosemarie. If you were to recommend one thing for students or parents of students to recommend to their kids to read on this question, what would it be?
Well, I think a really great book, if you're interested in something that's more US focused, would be Claudia Golden's Career and Family. I think it's a wonderful book that just details all the things that have kind of changed and contributed to allowing women to be more involved in the American economy. That's probably one of my favorites.
Super. And there are so many other good books by our partners like Common Sense Economics, which is just an awesome introduction. And that book has been available in Nepali and Hindi and Ukrainian and Kiswahili and French and Spanish and Korean and many, many other languages. So that's another one that one of our Atlas partners has produced. Well, with that, thank you very much for an enjoyable conversation and one that is uplifting, because it's not just a story of suffering, it's a story of human liberation. It's a story of activity, and it's a story of people reaching out and demanding what is theirs, which is their right to freedom, the right to live, the right to work, and the right to be an active agent in the world. Thank all of you for joining us, and thanks to our wonderful panelists and participants. See you all next time at Freedom Worldwide.